Ready? Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Standards Committee, Tuesday, the 6th of August. I only know that because it says it's there. Introduced by me, none. Item 3, declarations of interest. Does anybody else need to? Does anybody else recognise their names in the pink papers? No?
Again, it would depend on where the discussion.
Committee forward plan.
I think most of the items that we identified last year, we did bring forward to the committee and various pieces of work on process on the back of those discussion back. Obviously, hopefully, the report is fairly self-explanatory, so it's to be populated with any suggestions that you might have. That
Take the recommendation to add.
So we don't currently have anything on there. So it's just, you know.
Have you got any suggestions?
Well,
I was going to say that clearly this committee has previously routinely reviewed certain protocols that the council maintains. I think it's probably good practice to bring those back annually, perhaps. Councillor safety protocol that we talked about last year, and those items were discussed. So maybe we can look back through the previous minutes and make sure that think of things outside of this meeting that you want to add to the full plan. But equally, if there are things that members of the committee would really like us to discuss, then we can add that to the full plan as well.
But we're not really making a recommendation if we're going to say we're going to talk about it afterwards. Let's make it
sort of employment, or some members are here for a long time and don't get really recognised for their time.
What we maybe call a councillor training strategy is something that is on.
What about the 3 that you mentioned?
I've got them as
You want them as well?
Yeah, may as well.
Okay. You want to introduce this as well?
yeah.
I'll take again of the standards committee is to monitor the councillor's code of conduct, maintain the councillor complaints procedure, and review complaints that are received about councillors. But I think over the last 18 months, we've tried to bring a few additional items to this committee. So for life, findings from local ombudsman that relate to other complaints procedures as well. They're all valuable things that we could bring to the committee. As we've just discussed, I think there is maybe a wider remit for this committee around councillors training and development. It's always had responsibility for advising the full council on training in relation to the code of conduct, but I think that could be broadened out to some extent to advise on training more generally about what is required of councillors, what is the training that is mandatory, what do we offer in terms of ongoing development, and as Councillor Hassell's alluded to, what is it that councillors can point to when they get to the end of their terms of office that demonstrate the things they've done and the training they've undertaken during that time. So there are some draft terms of reference presented at Appendix 1 and 2. They reflect the text in red highlights any additions to the existing terms of reference that sit within our current constitution. They are recorded in 2 places, in the articles of the constitution and also in the scheme of delegations. But the red text really reflects things that this committee has already done in the last 18 months, but perhaps weren't directly reflected in their terms of reference. And I would suggest that it would be appropriate to recommend to council that we update the terms of reference to reflect that. Equally, as it was with the full plan, it is within the gift of this committee to add other things or request other things are added to the terms of reference of the standards committee. It's really about making the best use of the time of both the councillors and the independent members who attend this committee. And as it says in the report, with the independent assurance that can be provided by the IPs, I think it's well placed to take on some additional responsibilities. So if councillors would like to add anything to the proposed terms of reference, we can either draft them up and bring that back, or if we can agree it now, it can be recommended to council for approval.
We can agree it now and send it to the council meeting.
Go on, I've got some questions actually, first of all. These, you've got here, it says, and church and parent government representatives, that's in the role and function A. Is that because it's not just this committee, it's other committees?
Yes. So in certain committees, there are statutory requirements for certain committees to have church and parent governor representatives, particularly I think it's the Children and Young People Scrutiny Board. So anyone who is a member of one of our committees is bound by the code of conduct. So whether you're a councillor or a co-opted member, and so the training that this committee recommends in relation to the code of conduct, clearly that training is for co-opted members as much as it is for councillors.
My next query here is on the hearings panel subcommittee.
Yep.
It says on A that the membership will be comprised of a maximum of 5 councillor members of the Standards Committee or nominated substitute appointed by the monitoring officer. Can you explain how that works? Why is it the monitoring officer appoints?
Well, the hearings panel subcommittee is convened only in circumstances when a complaint has made its way through the complaints procedure to the point that it requires a hearing. Now, ordinarily, we would appoint the councillor members of the Standards Committee, but if there were circumstances that meant that a councillor member of the Standards Committee held a conflict of interest, then clearly we would need to appoint a substitute. And as with any committee, or when quite often the monitoring officer exercises their delegation to appoint members to committees, for example, when a councillor might be unwell for a period of time and we need to switch members within a political group.
I thought that's what substitutes were for. What I'm querying here is the wording appointed by the monitoring officer. That statement there makes it sound like, let's say, for instance, Councillor Atwell decides he wants to be on it, and the monitoring officer says, no, it's not you, it's going to be you, because that's how it reads.
I suppose I presume that in those circumstances, the monitoring officer would need to make a judgment as to whether the substitute. The monitoring officer would advise if a councillor held a conflict of interest in relation to a matter that was brought before the subcommittee, and equally, if a substitute was proposed that might also hold a conflict of interest, I guess the monitoring officer would advise in those circumstances too. I don't know if Emily would add anything to that.
Someone has to appoint to the committee. Someone has to do it. It's generally my role in relation to most committees as the MO, or if someone is acting as a deputy MO in my absence, to be that person who says, well, you are appointed, rather than it's not intended as a provision to that would ever be used by the monitoring officer in some sort of draconian way to decide who should be a member of that. However, if you can think of a different wording for to make you more comfortable with that, happy to consider it.
Okay, I'll consider that, because it does the way it's read does mean that you have no control.
I would draw a comparison with licensing subcommittees, for example, where when a taxi licensing or general licensing matter needs determination, we convene a subcommittee of the overall licensing committee. We don't convene a meeting of the licensing committee to decide who the subcommittee members are. There is a delegation in place to the monitoring officer to determine who those members are, and the reality is that we put a call out to the members of the licensing committee and we get volunteers to sit. In this particular case, it would by default be the councillor members of the Standards Committee, unless there were reasons that required otherwise.
Okay, well, I mean, you just while you're talking about that, you talked about declaration of interest. Declaration of interest are not the concern of the officers of the council. They're concerns for the councillors themselves. What the councillors have to do is take advice from officers as to whether they believe there is a declaration of interest. That's how the agendas are worked out. Councillors have to declare any interests. So that doesn't hold water with me. Is in the fact that because of declarations of interest, it's up to the individual councillors, and if they choose to ignore those declarations of interest, they can get into trouble for it. And that is their responsibility. However, my next one is on C. Again, on here it says the monitoring officer will appoint a chair. That just sounds a little bit, again, a bit like it's the monitoring officer's remit to appoint the chair, and I don't think it is.
Who would you suggest to appoint the chair?
The people who've come together as a committee. So if we'd come here and there was no chairman, what we would do is we would say nominations for chairman.
Yeah, agreed. I think in this particular set of circumstances, if you look through the procedures around a hearing of the Standards Committee, there are functions that are delegated to the chair of that hearing that are required to be fulfilled prior to the hearing actually meeting. So making sure that paperwork is distributed to the subject member and the complainant within appropriate timescales, that kind of thing. So clearly it's in the interest, unless we wanted to bring together a meeting of the hearings panel committee to appoint a chair, to then go away again to fulfill those tasks and then come back again, it stands to reason that we haven't done it.
We could of course do that.
Of course we could. But
meeting just to appoint a chair.
But in these circumstances, the way it would work would be the monitoring officer or representative of the monitoring officer, such as myself, one of my Dem Services colleagues, would go to the members of the hearings panel and say, we need to appoint a chair. Can we have your nominations? And we would simply go with the majority to appoint someone.
But you understand what I'm saying, is the wording doesn't sort of suggest that we have that choice.
If only you, I would suggest that isn't the intention of the wording at all, and the monitoring officer never acts in that way in terms of a draconian sort of appointment. We take, as Alex said, we take the view of the committee. Who would you like to appoint the chair, and we appoint. But if you're uncomfortable with the wording, of course, it's in committee's gift to propose alternatives.
If that's okay, I'll come back to that. I'll have a think about what would be more appropriate. And then we could bring that back to this committee, and then we could refer that to council as the agreed wording. Is that okay? Everybody okay with that? Good. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, item 7, volume and outcome of councillor complaints. This one's pretty straightforward.
Did anyone else, did something with the IPs, or they had any comments?
Sorry, did you have any comments? No. No.
Thank you.
Item 7, volume and outcomes of councillor complaints. The information's there. I think it's just a case of noting how many there are. Yeah.
Noted, Chair, that we have had a record-breaking year for complaints this year, but we have been dealing with those as they come through.
Do we want to put that down? It's a record-breaking year.
No, and this we thought it should be that we have seen an upward trajectory in the number of complaints received.
Do you want to-
From council to councillor.
But just in general, in the number of complaints received, although we have one complaint where there's numerous complaints around the same issue.
Olympic year.
Sorry?
Hopefully not.
Olympic year. So we got the gold medal this year.
Record-breaking complaints, yes. Both of them.
You just started. Right, item 8. I wish to discuss this before we do the exclusion of the press and the public. As you know, I've been on this committee for quite a number of years, and I have yet to read any pink papers that reveal any private information about anybody. It is, I would say there's been a slight change in that you understand a little bit more about what has happened. No specific details about what the complaint is about, or who it's about, or who has complained. And so I've always maintained that there's absolutely no reason for these papers to be in the pink section. If it named people, and if it gave specific details about what that person has been accused of doing, then I could understand it, but it doesn't do any of that. They're all very generic. And so I'd like to open a discussion with independent members and councillors as to whether you think along the same lines, or whether you think these items should remain in the private section.
Oh, Chair, just through here, I think it'd be useful for Emily to give the rationale why we've got pink papers with that level of detail on, and then that might inform the discussion.
So, Chair, I would say that remember, just to remind committee that this committee resolved, I think in 2 meetings ago, to set up a working group with particularly this issue in mind, and to discuss the implications of this and to take that forward. So that work is ongoing. There's been relatively limited progress granted over the last few months. As a committee would know, it's been a fairly busy time for colleagues within them services. However, the intention is for the working group to take that forward. It has not been an officer decision to conduct the committee in this way. It has been a decision taken by this committee in the interests of natural justice and reputational damage in the event of vexatious or unfair conduct claims being made, that confidentiality of the subject number should be maintained. That has been the view of this committee in its various guises for many years. And it is consistent with standard practice across other councils. It is the case that a number of complaints are dismissed with no finding against the subject member. And it is a view for this committee whether they, and it obviously this committee is well placed to take that view, given there is, you're not Widdicombe, you have got a parity of membership across all the political groups, to take a view that it is not in councillors' interests for their identity to remain confidential before a investigation takes place or the circumstances of a conduct claim are reviewed, investigated, taken forward. As Alex and I have explained on numerous occasions, that is in the gift of this committee. However, I do feel that there are implications which I would suggest that committee members may want to discuss with their groups before taking a decision that will affect all 51 councillors potentially.
Councillor Garth.
Very quickly first, can you, obviously after this meeting, when you get a time, find out if other authorities are operating on a similar level to us, or are they disclosing the subject member's name or whatever? Let's see how they operate. Secondly, I think we ought to be very careful of going down this road because there's all sorts of implication and not just reputational. There has been, I wouldn't say, litigation between two councillors or a councillor and an officer, and this committee finds that person sort of guilty or not guilty as the case might be, and the case goes to court. That could have an effect on what happens there. So I honestly, I mean, I know, Chair, you've been sort of very, very vocal about having this right for a number of years, but I don't follow your logic as to what possible gain there is for this committee. If a name was there, Mr. Joe Bloggs done this, how would it affect the decision that we make rather than X or Y? It wouldn't have any effect. But you could end up, as I said, not just doing reputational damage, but sort of legal implications concerning that individual if they are found to be guilty by this committee.
Okay, can I just answer him on this? I just make it very clear, right? As I said right at the beginning, it's not about naming people on these pink papers, unless it is about naming people, and then there should be pink papers. My argument here is there's no names on these papers. There's no specific detail about what the complaint is about. And so therefore, does it warrant them being in pink papers? This paper would reveal nothing to anybody that didn't, unless you were particularly involved in it. You wouldn't reveal anything. They should be, in my view, in the white papers without names, as they are at the moment. And so therefore, why are we putting spurious generic information in a paper that I'm pretty sure that you all don't know? You might know some of them, you might know because there might be your sort of members or whatever, but I'm pretty sure you don't know all of them and what they're about, who they're about, or what they're about. Sorry, Emily, you were going to.
I suppose, I understand that point, Chair. I think, firstly, papers are not supposed to be a breeding ground for speculation and gossip and guessing about who it would be, etc. And that being in the public domain, and there is the risk of reputational damage and people jumping to conclusions. And we have seen the impacts of misinformation being spread and incorrect conclusions drawn. And also we have to be extremely careful about risks around data protection and inadvertently having a breach of data protection legislation. But that could probably be managed. But I would caution against generating speculation.
I would just add to what Emily has said is that the categories of exempt information are defined under Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, and paragraph 1 of that schedule is about withholding information that relates to any individual. So if an individual is named, that is legitimate grounds for withholding information. But paragraph 2 is information that is likely to reveal the identity of an individual. And if you know sufficient information about the background of a complaint, you could piece together bits of information that could lead you to identify an individual. That could be the correct individual or the wrong individual, as Emily's already alluded to. So there are risks around that, but I would say that there is a quite clear statutory provision that allows us to withhold this information from publication if we are so minded, and that has been the view of this committee in recent years. I think, as it sets out in the report, there's been a vote taken on 2 occasions in the past, the most recent in 2021, and the agreement at that time was that the summaries will be provided in anonymised form in the confidential section of the agenda. But as we've already heard, that is for councillors to decide if you wish to disclose more information or hold elements of that discussion in public. That is your prerogative, but clearly you need to enter into that decision with full awareness of the risks. And when we established the working group that Emily mentioned previously, one of the key areas that working group were to look into were questions around the extent to which information about complaints, whether those are complaints that have been received and not yet upheld, or upheld complaints are publicised. Now that work hoping to pick up in the next few weeks, now that we're through the busy last 2 or 3 months, and perhaps there are discussions that will be better had in that context. But as I say, it is this committee's gift to make a decision on the extent to which information is disclosed in relation to complaints.
Councillor Hassel.
Thanks, Chair. I think, I mean, looking at this report, I agree. There is nothing in there that sort of describes or reveals the identity of the individual at all. And you would question why it's on pink papers in this format. I think the question about putting names in there is a different discussion. I think it's definitely worth further discussion, because as has already been highlighted, we've had a record year of complaints. Now, if people think actually my behaviour is going to end up as a matter of public record, albeit not with my name against it, would it prevent people from either putting in a complaint or behaving in a certain way? I don't know, but that's what I'm saying. It's worthy of discussion. That's all I'm saying. It's a bit like, and there's a further question to say: is this a matter of public record that the public should know how members are behaving? Again, it's a debate. I'm not questioning it either way. But equally, it's a bit like when Alex goes through public questions at full council. He just gives a very brief overview of the question. He doesn't read the question out verbatim. It's sort of an overview.
Do that now.
Well, but he gives it. But yeah, but you get what I'm saying. Could it be presented in that way? You know what I mean? Without any sort of. But I think it's worthy of discussion. So.
Look, I mean, let's look at some of the cases in these pink papers.
Well,
No,
we're
you
not
made
to a
them-
pink private session yet.
On the white papers, and we're discussing it, and quite clearly, sort of a member of the public, if they have made a complaint against the councillor, and the committee finds that the councillor hasn't done anything wrong, that member of public will be going around, they look after themselves and they do all this, and and even councillors will be sort of guessing, was it about him? Was it about him? Or he got away? So I
We do that anyway.
I don't really see the benefit. I don't see benefit of what you're asking.
Okay. Do any of the independent members want to ask any questions, make comment?
I've just reinforced what Alex said about being able to work out who it is without seeing because there's a number of these where you can sort of work out who it is.
Oh, okay.
and I'm not on the committee, after a quick search, I found that Milton Keynes, for instance, did publish this kind of levy.
Do they publish it?
Yeah, openly. So other councils do.
Okay, on the basis that this committee, not this committee, this reviewing committee is going to address this issue. I mean, it depends how long it's going to take for them to address it, because, you know, the council is notorious for taking its time over making particular decisions. Are we happy to keep it as it is until they've given their views on it? Happy with that? Yeah, good. Okay. So item 8, exclusion of the press and public, to consider as a resolution to exclude the press and public during consideration of the following items: that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following items on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure exempt information as defined in paragraphs 1 and 2 and of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public's interest in disclosing the information. Goodbye.